Okay, well, I think we can begin. Good evening, everyone. My name is Chrissy Kelly, and I am the founder of AbScent. Welcome this evening on our first attempt at a live Zoom event. Anyone that is a member of the AbScent Facebook group will probably have seen that I do quarterly Facebook Lives with my trustee, Simon Gane, who is an ENT at the Royal National Throat, Nose and Ear Hospital. So I will be introducing him now. So Simon, why don't you give us a wave and say hello?
Hello, everyone.
And also with me this evening, I have Professor Barry Smith, who is the director of the Centre for the Senses in London. Barry, give us a wave. And finally, I have Aidan Kirkwood with me. We work together at the University of Reading on a research project. Aidan has very kindly offered to help moderate this evening. So he's going to be keeping an eye on the chat box just to make sure that you don't have any questions as we go. So that is sort of by way of introduction. And I know that you are probably all here because you have seen an ad on Twitter or Facebook. I'm always interested to know how you found out about us. So do leave us a note in the chat box. That would be great to know. So tonight, what I'd like to do is speak to you a little bit about what's happening with people who have COVID-19, how people lose their sense of smell in general after a virus, and how or if COVID-19 may pose maybe a different set of circumstances. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Simon. And Simon, I'm hoping that you will give us a few words on this. Simon.
Oof, well, a small topic to start with, Chrissy. So where should we start? Okay, so a lot of you who are watching this know that, well, hopefully have realized that anosmia is a major symptom of infection with this new virus, the SARS-CoV-2 novel coronavirus. And Chrissy and Barry and I have had a lot of work over the past 6 weeks or so trying to get the UK government to see this, to see that this is the case, and together with others have managed to, I think, move the dial and finally get the UK government to understand that we need to take it very seriously. I've said, Chrissy and Barry, as you know, I've always said for a long time that no one cares about the sense of smell until they lose it. And this has just been the absolute clearest demonstration of that particular fact in the last 6 months. But we are there finally. I think everybody knows that that it is a significant part of this illness. And my hope, and I think Chrissy and Barry agree with me, is this really pushes the plight of people who may not have lost their sense of smell to the coronavirus, but for other reasons. It pushes their plight to the forefront, and we get more interest and more support and more research funded and in studying these diseases, so we can help more people. So I think that maybe looking on the bright side, because there's certainly going to be a lot of people with smell loss due to this disease. Fortunately, most of them will be hopefully very temporary, but there will be a significant portion who won't, unfortunately. And we need to look at ways that we can help these people a lot. And maybe we'll go into that in a little more detail later on.
Right. Okay. And Simon, I know that the BRS now has established new guidelines for treating patients here in the UK who come forward with smell loss issues. Yep. So is there anything that you can tell us about that might be useful for patients who would be tuning in here?
So we're going to publish this. I think it's already available to the public. I'm not actually sure whether that's the case. I think it has been released by the BRS. Do you know that if that's the case, Chrissy?
I don't think it's quite out there, but okay. Anyway, no, sorry. Barry is saying no. Oh.
No, okay. So I mean, I hope that these are going to be, okay, so these guidelines are a consensus document from people who do care about the sense of smell, even without losing it, to try and sort of nail down what we think is a sensible approach to the management of smell loss in the era of the coronavirus. And the problem with this is that, for instance, smell training, we talk a lot about smell training. Smell training has a solid experimental underpinning. It really, there's no doubt that, you know, we've done hundreds and hundreds of studies, well, maybe not literally hundreds, but a large number of very good studies looking at the effects of smell training in almost all types of smell loss. And we know if you're going to do one thing and you lose your sense of smell, if you do smell training, your chance of getting your smell back is the best that it can be. But we know that because we're doing multiple randomized, you know, well-controlled, well-designed, well-constructed, well-run trials. You can't do that with the coronavirus. It's here now, and these trials, getting them ethical approval, appropriate oversight, being done in a way that we know is safe for the patients, that takes time. So we have to try to come up with a logical set of recommendations based on our own experience, you know, people who've been managing these kind of conditions for a long time, to try and set up guidelines for the people who've lost their sense of smell and the doctors and others who are helping them deal with those.
Right.
And so that's what we're going to do. And I think they for the most part are very sensible and not particularly surprising. They're very much congruent with my own practice, for instance. There are a couple of things that I would have gone maybe a different way on, but that's part of this process, is trying to synthesize the approaches of a number of different clinicians and render that down into something that we all agree on. And that's where we are with the BRS
Right.
guidelines.
I mean, certainly in my experience with people in the Facebook group, I can really only answer on the basis, when people ask me questions, answer on the basis of what I know to be sort of typical in the pre-COVID period.
Yeah.
But we are noticing some aspects of smell loss amongst the COVID-19 patients that seem to be slightly off-center. There's some other things happening, and of course we don't have enough time. We're watching people's recovery in real time, which is extraordinary. When I think about the way the conversation is developed in the beginning of the COVID-19 Facebook group and where we are now, well, in the beginning, everyone was talking about things like the suddenness of the onset, the burning nostrils, things like that. And now we're starting to hear reports of what's happening at 6 weeks, at 8 weeks, at 10 weeks. And that, you know, that's the sort of thing that is new to us. We just have to wait and see what develops. And in the meantime, the best we can do is give the information that we had before COVID came. Yeah.
It's only in terms of interventions, because you don't, I mean, I mean, speaking as a scientist, as a researcher, this trove of information we have, as you say, watching a large group of people with very similar onsets go through this process, giving us a lot of information about the progress of this disease, which we think will give us information about, I mean, we've always known coronaviruses, they like the nose. Coronaviruses have been blamed for this kind of thing before. So we know that that probably a lot of the people who've lost their sense of smell and what's called a post-viral or post-infectious smell loss may have had an infection by another coronavirus. So this information is going to be very useful for people going forward, I think.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Simon. Barry, when people notice that they've lost their sense of smell, very often they'll say that they can't taste their food. And so there's been a great deal of confusion over smell and taste, the way they're linked. And I wonder if you could explain for our audience a little bit about what's going on there, as well as the role of chemesthesis in COVID-19 smell loss.
Okay, I'll try. I mean, I think it's very interesting, since we suddenly noticed that problems with smell, and often reported as problems with smell and taste, were cropping up with people who seem to have symptoms of COVID-19. And that's when Chrissy and Simon and I, working with our colleagues, were doing so much to try and have this recognized and try and have it acknowledged. But at the same time, I was dealing with lots and lots of inquiries on Twitter. I am spending almost all of my time on Twitter responding to people who said, I can't smell or taste anything. And quite often you have to ask them, are you sure you can't taste anything? Because although people can lose their sense of taste, if we look at just the incidence of people who have difficulties with their sense of smell compared to sense of taste, taste is often still there. And it's a very small percentage of the population who ever have a problem called agousia of actually losing the sense of taste. Mainly it's loss of smell, but they're related in the following way, that people will often say, I can't taste anything. And that's sometimes the first way they report having problems with smell. I can't taste anything, because what they mean is they don't get any of those recognizable flavors. They get very, very little coming from the mouth. And of course, you have to realize that what we call taste in a scientific context, what's actually coming from detection of substances on the tongue, is due to having receptors that pick up on salt, sweet, sour, bitter, savory, or umami, a fifth taste. And that's roughly all the tongue can give you. So if you think of all the flavors you're used to tasting, like peach and onion and mango and melon and strawberry, chocolate, pineapple, you don't have receptors on your tongue for pineapple or for strawberry or even for onion. So these flavors are not coming from the tongue. They're actually coming from the nose. And when the nose is not involved, suddenly all of the things that you think you should be tasting in your mouth are reduced to a very, very faint presence of salt, sweet, sour, or bitter. On Twitter, I kept saying to people who said, I've lost my sense of smell and taste, could you do this little test for me? Could you put some drops of salt on your tongue, or sugar, or a little squeeze of lemon juice? Can you taste that? And quite often they'd come back straight away and say, oh, yeah, I can taste that. But that's all I can taste. And now they know how much of what they were calling tasting was actually due to smell. So this is why it's not an easy thing to figure out what's going on in the chemical senses, as we call them. It's not easy to figure out how taste and smell relate to each other, how touch is involved, how many other senses are contributing to the single unified experience you have of a flavor. And Chrissy mentioned this thing, chemisthesis. What does that mean? Well, as well as having what the aromas from your food that rise through the back of the throat to the nose, and then they start to present molecules to your olfactory receptors, and that's where you get smell. As well as having that, you also have the texture of food, but you have a particular sensation when you're eating herbs or spices, certain herbs and spices. That's the stinging, tingling, burning, or cooling sensation that you get from certain foods. So we all know that mustard will taste very hot in the mouth and a little bit burning. And when you have too much wasabi, you'll sort of feel this pain at the bridge of your nose. And that's due to the trigeminal nerve. So the trigeminal nerve, as Simon would be able to tell us much better than me, is the fifth cranial nerve. It's the one that serves the eyes, the nose, and the mouth. And it's the one that rings bells when you have too much wasabi. You'll feel it at the bridge of your nose. If you have too many spices chemically irritating the nerve endings of this trigeminal nerve, the eyes will water, because of course, as soon as you irritate the nerve endings, trigeminal nerve detects that as the eyes being attacked, will flood them to protect them. So you get a cool sensation of menthol or mint, and you get a warm sensation of mustard, and that's chemisthesis. Now, it also means that you've got that in the mouth, in the eyes, and in the nose. And we noticed, Simon and I and Chrissy noticed, that when describing people describing their symptoms, they would say, I've got terrible conjunctivitis, my eyes are really itchy. And you say, oh, do you also have a sort of burning sensation in your nose? Yes, the nose is sort of very irritated and stinging. Some people even reported having sensations of tingling and burning in their mouths. That's clearly an indication that the trigeminal nerve is being affected by the virus. So there's a whole set of symptoms going in here, but it also means that it's revealing bit by bit the contribution that each of these senses is making to our experience of flavor, which we often confuse with just tasting, but really the principal contributor is really our sense of smell.
Right, and I'd just like to repeat that. I'd just like to repeat that this absence or this disruption in chemesthesis, so the inability to taste wasabi and mustard and that sort of thing, seems to be something special that we're seeing with COVID-19 that we have not seen in the past with typical post-viral smell loss. So it is of interest, and I'm seeing a couple of stories flash up here in the chat box. Very, very interesting. Right. Well, thank you for that background, Barry and Simon. I think what I'd like to do now is talk to you a little bit about smell training. Simon gave us a bit of background. It's well studied. I learned about it myself in 2013 and think it's a wonderful thing. And I'd like to sort of give you all a kind of crash course in what it means to smell train, because there are a lot of misconceptions, I think. And so I'd like to take you through that now. So Barry and Simon, if you please chime in if you see anything that you'd like to comment on. But I'll start by saying that smell training is very much is like physiotherapy. You have to do it regularly, and you have to do it over a period of time in order for it to actually work for you. I say this with my pre-COVID hat on. We are, of course, seeing people who recover from COVID-19 very rapidly. So the role of smell training in their recovery will remain unknown until we've done more studies. But in typical cases of post-viral smell loss, I think it's important to keep up with smell training for an extended period of time. We're not just talking about your nose, we're talking about your brain as well. So there's the place where those two things join up is really the bit that is of interest to us. So that is a very important message I have for you. Smell training, I think, is probably not the greatest term for what this is. I think the word training puts a lot of people off and they think, oh, it sounds like hard work. It actually should be called smell training and awareness, because what I really want you to do if you are going to start smell training is to become aware, and if it's been a long time for you, this will be a little bit more work, but that you want to always be open to interrogating your environment for smell. And I think that for people who have profound loss that lasts a while, very quickly they turn away from smell. And it's very important to get them back into that kind of, it's not even a routine, it's more like an expectation. And the jar method that I developed is a way of doing that. And I think for people who have really bad smell loss, profound smell loss, and who want to try smell training, the jar method is superior. So this is a typical jar. This is just 30 mils amber glass. You can get them on eBay or Amazon. I like them because they're small enough to be portable, but they are big enough to do the job. Namely, when you take the lid off, you can get your snout right down there. And there will be a buildup of very smelly headspace in that jar, because in the bottom of the jar, I have a little bit of blotting paper. I use actually watercolor paper, which I punch out, or you could cut out with a pair of scissors so that it fits the bottom of the jar. And then to that, you add your essential oils. And you keep your essential oils in the fridge because they can go off very quickly, especially if they're exposed to sunlight. Another advantage of this method is that it keeps your nose well away from the essential oils. if you are going to, if this is your bottle of essential oil and you're going to start smell training with that, and you really don't smell very well, the first thing that you're going to do is put that dropper next to your nose, and before you know it, you've touched the eucalyptus oil in this case. No, this is tea tree, to the delicate tissues of your nose, and that can sting. So I really don't recommend that. The other reason why I don't recommend smell training from essential oil bottles, which a lot of people want to do, is that this is a tiny hole, and there are not very many volatile molecules coming up out of that tiny hole, nor is there very much headspace inside this bottle. It's the difference between driving in the car with the windows down or driving in the car with one window cracked a tiny bit. You just get a whole lot more of the smelly air when you use the jar method. So twice a day, 20 seconds, smelling each jar. I think it's very important that when you put your nose to the jar and you take some breaths in through your nose, you want to take tiny sniffs, not enough for the air to go all the way down into your lungs, but for the air to just be coaxed up to the highest part of the nose, where it will hang around where the olfactory epithelium is, and you've got the best chance of smelling it. What you don't want to do is take a great sort of mountain air deep breath when you stick your nose into the jar, because the air will bypass your nose and go straight to the lungs. So that's kind of a potted version of smell training. You do want to pause between jars to sort of have a couple of breaths and rest your nose, and then do all 4 jars, as is recommended in the instructions that you'll find on the abscent.org website. And I think that in time, Aidan will be posting links to things that I'm talking about. So if you don't see that link yet, it will be coming up soon. So that's it for the technical aspects of smell training. Of course, the questions always start with things like, if I can't smell anything, what is the good of putting my nose into a jar? And for the answer to that question, I'm going to ask Barry to give us his ideas on that. Barry?
Yes. So a lot of people will say, I open the jar, I smell nothing, so why should I continue? But actually, there's an awful lot of evidence now coming through that the brain may be responding to, and even your receptors may be responding to, even at a very low level, some stimulation from these odors. And therefore, what you're trying to do is you're really trying to sort of reset the connection between the odor stimulating the receptors, it being transferred to the brain. And at the same time, if you know what's in the jar, if you know what you're trying to smell, you've also got this top-down influence where the brain is really sending signals back down to say, got anything, try to find this odor, try to find this aroma. And it's really about seeing whether there's a possibility of reconnecting, of getting the relays between the two warmed up and reconnected. And so it's worth doing it even when you think you're not getting anything. There are some brain imaging studies showing that when people say, oh, I'm not getting anything, there is still signs and signals of responses in the primary olfactory areas. So this gives us some confidence to think that you should persist and you should keep trying to do this. Certainly with COVID-19 sufferers, they've been saying to me, what should I do? And I've been insisting on smell training. And I say, smell everything. Don't waste an opportunity. Smell the shampoo in the shower. Try to smell things that you might be cooking with or others are cooking with. Smell everything. Smell the laundry. Try to stimulate as much as you can, because as Simon must know much more than Chrissy and I do when he sees patients, but we've seen this on social media. People don't get their sense of smell back from the COVID virus. When they do get it back, they don't get it back all at once. They tend to say, oh, I've just got rosemary, but nothing else. Or I've just got lavender, nothing else. And then you'd see, I would ask them to keep it going, and day by day they would add things. So you don't know what you might be able to smell. So that's why I think you should exploit the opportunity for as much self-experimenting as possible.
Yeah, that's right. There is smell everywhere around us. So I think that's very good advice.
There's solid basic science behind this. We know that your nose is trying to regenerate these nerve cells all the time. And as Barry says, there's a centrifugal sort of a drive from the brain down to the lower smell centers to try and reconnect the smell up. We can see this in mouse models. So we assume that this is true for humans. So just to add my voice to the cry of just carry on, because it's likely to work. It just might take a lot of time.
Yes, I agreed there, agreed. There are, of course, people do stumble along the way. I think a lot of people will say it's boring. It can be depressing to have it reinforced every time they go to smell train that they can't smell anything. And you know, as a result of that, people get into these negative conversations with themselves at a moment when they are supposed to be kind of concentrating. And this is why I always emphasize the sort of mindfulness aspect of what smell training is. You want to, as with mindfulness, you want to draw your attention to your physical experience. And I always say that, at least for me anyway, when I lost my sense of smell and I started to get it back, the process of smelling was no longer instant the way it is for healthy people, but it took time. And I think that if you're expecting an instant smell, or you're expecting the smell to be the way it used to be, that can be very frustrating. So here's my advice when you're starting out and you feel that you're really not getting anything, especially for those of you who've been in the Facebook group and said, oh, well, I can sort of smell one thing, but there's really one of those jars I can't smell at all. I want you to imagine that when you put your nose to that jar, it's like you are looking into a very, very, very deep well, and you've just dropped a pebble and you have no idea how deep that well is. And you just have to wait and wait. And the longer you wait, the fainter you know that sound is going to be. And that's the way it is. That's how it starts. And if you can find that, even that weak signal, and lock onto it and remember it and nurse it and go back and find it again, you will be reinforcing that over and over. Simon, do you want to?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, when I see my patients who say, oh, I can't smell any of those four, what we call the Hummel four, I say, well, what can you smell? As soon as you find anything that you're even getting a trace with, chase that down, hunt it down and practice with it all the time. Because the underlying physiology, we think, is that the nerve cells that can detect that are going to live longer. They're going to hang around more. So the nerve cells in the nose are constantly turning over, dying off, being regenerated. But we know from mouse models that the longer they're stimulated, the longer they live, or the more they're stimulated, the longer they live. So you're keeping the bit of your nose that's smelling alive for longer. And that's going to increase the overall population and going to give you more and more nerves that are growing and more chances to smell other things. So it's not just practice makes perfect. It's actually sort of a fundamental physiological fact that you just need to practice.
This is also a good thing to remind people of. I think that even in general, in the general healthy population whose sense of smell is okay, it will decline as they get older, but the more they can exercise it, the longer they'll maintain it, the longer they'll keep it. And there's lots of good evidence, published scientific evidence from smell training showing that this allows you to preserve your sense of smell and the acuteness of your sense of smell, its ability to be working. So it really is one of those use it or lose it senses, that the less you bother with it, the less you exercise it, the more it's likely to start to decline. That's very unlike what happens with our hearing or our eyesight. You know, they will go, they will decline, but in those cases we probably know that we've got substitutes for them where we use glasses or where we try to use hearing aids, but your sense of smell not. So to exercise it is really important, and smell training is going to help us, when we get older. Lots of evidence it keeps you not just smelling, but it also, some evidence it actually keeps you cognitively more acute
Yes.
than does Sudoku. There's a lovely study by the Thomas Hummel group in Germany where they took an aging population and trained some of them for 3 months to do Sudoku puzzles and trained the rest to do smell training. And comparing them at the end, it turned out the people who did Sudoku were better at doing Sudoku, but not much else. Whereas the people who were doing smell training had general cognitive increase on other tasks outside of what they were doing. So this is a reason to do it. I certainly do it. I want to do it.
And I think it's another important thing that came out in that study is that it proved to to lift the mood. So it is and I find that as well, and I find other people who smell train say that to me. There is something about it that is once you can kind of really get your teeth into it, it becomes a very positive feedback loop.
So someone on the, I want to, if I'm looking at questions and I can't answer them all, but they're very good. Somebody was saying, what if smells can smells be confused? Smelling coffee, smelling like cigarettes. Now, you know a lot about that, Chrissy. Why don't you say something about that?
Okay, well, this is quite a common feature of, again, I have to say, the typical post-viral smell loss scenario. And I'm doing some research right now with Dr. Jane Parker of the University of Reading and Aidan Kirkwood, who's with us tonight. He works with us on that project as well. And this is called parosmia, a qualitative change in our experience of smell. And that just means it's distorted. And we are just starting to get some ideas about why this happens and how this happens. But it can be very, very distressing. I know that from personal experience, but I've also read, there's a wonderful paper by Andreas Keller and someone else whose name escapes me about sort of patient stories put together, people who've had these qualitative disturbances to their sense of smell and just how life-altering that can be. Now, if you're lucky, parosmia will be a passing phase. It'll be a couple of months. In general, that seems to be the usual thing. And then that will give way, things will start to smell normal again, and then you will have some sort of recovery.
Simon, somebody was asking about whether using steroids or saline.
Yeah, I saw that.
Good idea.
Yeah, it was about the steroid spray. So when we talk about smell loss, there are two main types of smell loss. There's the blocking sense of smell, which you can imagine is just the same as putting a nose peg on your, a clothes peg on your nose. So the olfactants can't get up into the nose to where they're going to be smelt. And then there's the neural type. So then something wrong with the way the nerves pick up the smell and relay that to the brain. And steroids are really good for the first type, probably not so good for the second. So there are a couple of ways we can give steroids. The first is, and by far the most common, is the one we use for allergic rhinitis, for hay fever. And that's just a simple nose spray of a steroid in the nose that is that only works in the nose. It doesn't get to anywhere else in the body, and that's fairly sensible. Our guidelines are that you might as well try it. Because you don't know, you've just lost your sense of smell. You don't know whether it's a block or whether it's something that's troubling the nerves. So you might as well try a regular nose spray, and you can get them over the counter. The important thing to note is that when I'm saying a nose spray, I mean a steroid nose spray. So I'm not talking about the decongestants. So something like oxymetazoline, xylometazoline, the ones that open the nose up too much, they'd actually probably over the long term be bad for your sense of smell. So we don't generally recommend people get used to using those. But a steroid nose spray is sensible, because whenever we talk about a treatment, we have to think not only what the benefits could be, but also what are the risks. And the risks of a steroid nose spray, because it's not into the rest of the body, it doesn't affect the immune system anywhere else, are minimal. The side effects are really, you can get a slight increase in nosebleeds. So for most people, that's fine. When you're talking about oral steroids, taking tablets, then the balance changes, because this is a systemic body-wide immunosuppression. And in a pandemic like this one, the last thing you want to be doing is knocking your immune system over the head. That said, it looks to be, from our other patients who are on oral steroids for other things, doesn't seem to be that much of a risk factor, but I would not like to risk it. I'd not like to try and find out the hard way. So oral steroids, no. Nasal steroids, yes.
Right.
You're muted, Barry.
Right. Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you, Simon.
Hi, Chrissy.
Yes, Aidan.
We've got a question here that you're probably best to answer. Kay Charlton asked, how do we measure how far we are with our smell training? I see many people posting daily at what percentage they're at, but how do we work out that percentage?
Well, that is a really interesting question, and one that we've been talking about a lot at the GCCR, which I will mention a little bit later on tonight. Unless you are lucky enough to have been to a clinic that does objective smell testing, and that would be with something like the sniff and sticks test or the AbScent test. They both have their pros and cons, but not many people have access to those tests, which is why a home test, a self-administered self-assessment, is a really important tool, more than ever now, because we've got so many people who've had smell loss. And the idea behind the self-assessment brochure that I have on the AbScent website is that you go through it, and Aidan will be posting a link sometime soon. You'll go through that and you'll make some notes for yourself, and you will get an idea of what your sense of smell is like today before you start smell training. Or if you've already started smell training, well then just draw a line in the sand and that will be where you start from. As far as the people who are in the Facebook group who say I'm at 50% or 70%, I'm quite curious about that, because in my 5 years of managing a Facebook group pre-COVID, I never saw anyone say anything like that. It was, people were always very, well, I'm not really sure how good it is today or not. But in the COVID-19 group, there seems to be a great certainty about what their sense of smell is doing on any given day. I don't know where they get those numbers from, but they do seem quite convinced by that. So I think we should sort of take that on board. But I do recommend for the lady that asked this question that you try the self-assessment, complete it, put it away somewhere, and go back to it in a couple of months and try it again. This should not be confused with the diary that goes with the smell training instructions. So there's a smell training instructions and diary, which is another PDF that gives you the outline of smell training as I've described it earlier this evening. And then there is a page where you could record your experiences with the 4 different essential oil jars that you might want to revisit every couple of weeks. It's a bit like going on a diet. You don't want to measure yourself every day. You'll drive yourself crazy. Let a couple of weeks elapse in between, then go back to it and see if you've noticed qualitative changes, if you've noticed a change in the strength of your perception. And then you might also, on that diary, keep a note of how you're feeling in yourself, what's your well-being like, because that's also a really important factor. And I think that for so many people who come into the Facebook groups, especially the old group, by the time they get into the group, the problem is not really just in their nose. The problem is everywhere in their life. You know, they're suffering in their personal relationships, in their relationship with food, trying to feed their families. They're anxious about safety issues. There's so much going on in the mind of a person who's lost their sense of smell. It is a really, really difficult thing, not only to live with, but even just get your head around. Because, you know, you might you might have, you might tell your friend that you've lost your sense of smell, and it might take you 5 minutes to describe what happened, but it could take you hours to describe what it's like. I mean, just describing how bizarre and how weird it is to live without smell when we depend on it subconsciously for so much of our human experience. So I think that there are so many problems that really need to be understood by doctors and people who are treating us. Simon,
the problem is that I personally, as a smell doctor and a smell researcher, I would love a way of collapsing this multi-dimensional sense into just one nice percentage. That would, if we could find a way to do that, that would make my job a whole lot easier. But as Barry knows, I mean, we've mentioned Andreas Keller already. He estimated what is it, something like 1 trillion different scents, because it's not just one. So let's say there are 350 to 400 different receptors expressed in any normal human nose. Those can be picking up a number of different molecules. Each of them switches them on in various ways. It's a horrendously complex, multidimensional sensory space, and to reduce that to one number, well, if they've worked it out, let me know, because yeah. I think what they're doing is giving it a subjective sense of where they are compared to where they were and where they started from, which is useful, but it's maybe not an objective assessment of their smell function.
Thank you. And Aidan, are there any other questions that you'd like?
Yeah, we have two questions here that are quite similar that have just came up, and people are asking about during the sort of times of COVID-19, some people, when they're recovering, they can't smell bad smells. Do we know why that is, or have you noticed that yourself on the Facebook, Chrissy?
Everyone, well, not everyone, but a lot of people comment about this. So fecal smells seem to be, your sort of typical bathroom smells seem to be the thing that people can't smell at all. And I don't know why that is. That is something that is of interest to my research colleague at the University of Reading. I think there's probably a good molecular basis for that somewhere out there, but it's not unusual, and pretty much everyone remarks on it. I've never met someone who lost their sense of smell after a virus who didn't also experience that. So for what it's worth.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Right. Anything else, Aidan, before I move on to the next item?
I spotted a couple of questions zooming past.
Yes.
There was one about tinnitus.
Oh.
So very, very briefly, so some people, there has been a sort of significant portion of people who've been proven to be COVID-19 positive who described new onset tinnitus. Tinnitus is very tricky. It's a very tricky symptom. So tinnitus, for those who don't know, is any sound that you can hear when there's no sound there. There are rare causes that actually are noises coming from inside your head, but for the most part, they seem to be something that your ears make up. And they can be triggered by almost anything, a fever, any loud noise, any sudden change in the hearing. All of these things can trigger tinnitus. And our current understanding of most subjective tinnitus is that it's essentially a response to hearing loss, in that the brain is expecting input from the ears, and when you lose that input, the brain essentially makes it up. So tinnitus is definitely a symptom. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a direct result of viral infection of the audiovestibular nerve, the nerve that does the hearing. But that said, we've talked a lot about the very weird neurological aspects of this disease that we're seeing. I mean, most, as we've said before, most viral infections don't give you chemosensory problems, don't give you taste problems, but we are seeing people with all of these things. And from an anatomical point of view, that's really odd, because as Barry said, we're taking with the first cranial nerve, the one that does the smelling, that's in your nose going up to the top of the brain, trigeminal nerve coming from sort of the middle of the brain, And then the taste nerve, which is really odd, it goes through your ear. Well, one of them, there are three, goes through your ear and then down to the front of the tongue. The back of the tongue is supplied with taste via a separate nerve, and the top of your voice box, the epiglottis, is supplied by a third nerve, but it also has taste receptors on it. So for all of these things to be knocked out, something very odd is going on, and we haven't got to the bottom of that yet.
Very odd symptomatology, as people are saying. That also, it's a bit ghoulish, but it makes it fascinating for medical researchers like you. I mean, I think it's a fascinating virus for that reason. But I was going to say about tinnitus, just to bang the point home, there's a nice connection we can make that, as Simon said, when the brain consists of information it receives through the senses coming in, but also information it sends down from the brain to the signaling system. And when you don't get any input from below, when nothing is appearing there, that's when, in the case of tinnitus, the brain makes up. It's as if it sends a signal down, a probe, can't hear anything, so it sends a signal down, and then you generate a sound that isn't coming from the outside. And if you remember, we were saying in smell training, that's what you're trying to do, even if you think you're not detecting something, because of the top-down messaging from the brain right to the the primary olfactory cortex. If you can keep stimulating it, you're trying to sort of wake it up and get the signal. I mentioned to somebody on the chat, but I'll say it again for tinnitus. I have tried this. It doesn't necessarily work for everybody, but noise cancelling headphones, which Simon is wearing, they try to match the sounds they're getting from the outside with a sound, and then it cancels out. I find if I have a little bit of tinnitus now and then, when it comes on, I try to sing exactly the tone that's in the tinnitus signal, or even just imagine it, and it just attenuates. And it's a little bit like making your own noise cancelling headphones from the brain. Try it. It doesn't harm you. It might help.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you. That's fascinating. I mean, I've often wondered, it would make an interesting bit of research to see if thinking about smell training would be as powerful as actually smell training. I mean, I know that does sound a little bit crazy, but I am such a believer in this kind of visualizing smells and conjuring them up and bringing them back. And this is a skill that I have built. I wasn't able to do this before. I got so interested in smell training and became very engaged with my own sense of smell. And I'm now able to do that to a really very vivid extent. And I always imagine when that happens to me. So if I'm reading a passage in a book or something that feels very evocative, or I see a photograph and suddenly, and very often it's connected to weather. So the weather of my childhood seems to be the most potent way of provoking these kind of vivid smell memories. And what must be going on in my brain? And I think it must be the sort of thing that goes on in your brain when you're smell training, because you're really trying to pull the sort of emotions and the memories and everything down into, it's got to be sending messages into the olfactory bulb. And that's really the goal of all of this. We want to keep the olfactory bulb getting messages through it, keeping it healthy, keeping it to maintain its volume. Simon might give us a little talk about how the olfactory bulb volume is really important for our sense of well-being, but you want to keep that healthy at all costs. And this is why when people say to me, oh, I've got polyps, I can only smell twice a year when I have a course of steroids, is there any point in me smell training? Well, strictly speaking, probably not, because it's not the same situation as a post-viral smell loss, but for overall olfactory bulb health, I think it probably might not be a bad thing. What do you think, Simon?
I think that's, yeah. So my other interest is inflammatory nasal disease and usually nasal polyposis. And when almost all of my patients, because I tend to see the more advanced cases, have smell loss. And I always encourage them, when they can smell, even a little bit, to really work with that, because we know that, as I said, these nerves are regenerating. You want to feed them a signal to keep them around, and you may just increase the amount that are around and preserve the sense of smell for longer. Obviously, what I'd like to do is just be giving them steroids all the time, but that's another talk entirely.
I think, Chrissy, your point about thinking of smell is quite important. There's well-known research that using the words for odors actually does trigger some of the same areas that your brain is using to actually perceive the smells of those odors. So using cinnamon or vanilla or mint or clove or whatever, you should actually be triggering them. The other reason I think for imagining odors is when people have post-viral loss, if it does go on for a very long time, a lot of people will report not being able to remember how things smell, not remembering what a pine tree smells like, or a bonfire smells like, or sawdust smells like. So I'm wondering, I don't know, and I don't know how to do the research, but I know it's something that Thomas Hummel's also interested in. Wondering whether if people keep having odor memories, thinking about odors, thinking about smells, whether it keeps that system of classifying and that ability to spontaneously generate at least a little bit of imagining or memory by the exercise of it. And I think it's unknown, but I think it's well worth doing. For just the reasons we talked about use it or lose it. I think it's probably the right thing to do, to try to avoid getting to a position where you can no longer remember what some of these familiar things smell like.
Yeah. I think that's a very, very important aspect to smell training. And I would definitely encourage anyone who is thinking about smell training to think about it in a larger context and sort of get, not just focus in on the jars, but of course that's the entry, but the thinking about smell is so important. I remember I once met someone who said, so what do you attribute, your success or the fact that you've recovered your sense of smell? Mostly, I mean, my sense of smell is pretty good, but not great, but not perfect, let's say. And I said, thinking about smell is the way that I got there. And it's just been everything. And I thinking about smell in all different kind of ways, thinking about smell training, thinking about my daily experience in my smell world. That's so important. And it's so easy for people to turn off from that, especially people who've had profound loss. They just stop caring. They forget to look for the smell. They that's a really hard habit to break once you've kind of given that up and pushed that to the side. Right, well, we've got just a few minutes left. I know there are many unanswered questions, and I just want to say, for those of you who've asked about treatments, that will have to wait for another session. These Zoom sessions I'm hoping to do every other week, and I've got a couple lined up already. You will be hearing about them in the Facebook group, on Twitter, or if you want to receive our newsletter, there will be a new one coming out now every time we have another event. Do go to abscent.org and sign up for the newsletter. So I wanted to kind of wrap up tonight and talk a little bit about the GCCR, which I mentioned earlier. The GCCR is actually the Global Consortium for Chemosensory Research. It formed as a rapid response to the rising pandemic earlier in March. We are a group of over 450 scientists from over 40 countries, and we got together and we worked very hard, what seemed like night and day, to create a survey which is now being disseminated all over the world in all these different languages. And this survey is it's called the GCCR Survey, but really what they're they are looking for people who have had respiratory illness in the last 2 weeks. So if that is you, if you've had, and when they say respiratory illness, they mean flu-like, or possibly COVID-19. If that's you and it's been within the 2-week window, Aidan will post a link to that survey. You can take it in your home language. And that survey is hoping to understand more about the relationship between COVID-19 and smell and taste changes, including the chemesthesis changes that Barry was mentioning, talking about things like wasabi, hot mustard, chili, menthol, so on and so on. So the GCCR is an incredible collaboration of a lot of wonderful scientists, clinicians, patient advocates. That would be me, and there's another charity as well involved called Fifth Sense. So we are all working together to try and find some answers. So yeah, I do the Global Consortium for Chemosensory Research. There it is. So, well, you know, do encourage you to go along to that. Now, within the GCCR, we have a separate subgroup, which is the British here in the UK group. And Barry is the lead of that group. And Barry, can you just give us a few minutes on the smell and taste change survey and how it relates to the GCCR survey?
Yes, of course. So we're very keen to pick up on highly detailed information about the way you have perceived changes in taste and smell, maybe even chemesthesis as well. And we want to know about the onset, how long it lasted, the duration. Some of you are still with it. Some of you will have come out of it. We want to know about how it relates to any other symptoms that were around and the sequence in which things happened, whether you lost your sense of smell and then, or thought you weren't tasting anything and then other symptoms arise, or whether it was the other way around. So there's a lot of detailed information that will help us a lot to understand the course of the infections that people are suffering from now, and maybe even learn something about the mechanism of infection. So it'd be terribly important if you can help us by taking this survey for the UK group. And even if you're not in the UK, I'm quite happy for you to take the survey. The information's important. We will separate it out. You'll be asked about which country you're in. So I think if Aidan is putting up the link to the survey, to our UK survey, it's just called the Changes in Smell and Taste during the COVID-19 pandemic. And it's coming from the University of London, and Simon and Chrissy and Aidan and lots of our colleagues who are clinicians and sensory scientists are part of that study. So we would be very, very much helped if you can take the time. It's quite a short survey. At the end of it, if you're still with symptoms at the end of it, you can click through and take the GCCR survey too. So you can have the double whammy if you're really keen to contribute to the science, and we would love you to do that for us. Thanks.
Hang on a second. Before we sign off, I think that we need a different link, Aidan. I think you might have put, that's the link to the GCCR survey in English, but I'm looking for the link.
Yeah, I've just posted the one for the whole languages. That's just coming. It's maybe a slight lag in the messages.
We need the
UK.
The UK survey.
I'm going to get it right now.
Okay, thank you. I should have it nearby as well, always. See if I can find it.
Hang on a second, everyone. There you go.
Great, thanks, Chrissy.
But please, by all means, do stop by and fill out that survey. That would be really important to us. So I think we can pretty much wrap up now. I think I can start saying my thank yous. So thank you especially to Aidan, who is always working in the background and making me look good. So high five, Aidan. I owe you a beer if the pub ever opens.
Yeah, whiskey.
A whiskey, of course. And Barry, thank you very much for adding tonight to tonight. I have done plenty of events with Simon, but this is my first event with you, and I'm very grateful for your participation. So thank you very much.
Pleasure. Lovely to work with you two as well. You're terrific advocates.
Well, we need more of that. We need more of that. And Simon, thank you. my co-host of the past. So it's great to see you again. And again, one more time, I'll just say to everyone, if your questions went unanswered, I'm really sorry. There will be more events like this. We will be putting this broadcast up onto YouTube and into the Facebook group and all the good places where you can find it. So do keep your questions coming. As a community, we can't exist without you. You are making it better for yourselves by participating here and helping scientists know more. So that's it for me. And so I'll say good night to everyone and see you another time. Thank you.
Bye, Chrissy. Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Simon. Bye, Chrissy. Aidan.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.